Hi, I'm Tyra G, your host of Frankly Speaking with Tyra G. Welcome again to our virtual global gathering of phenomenal women and all of you who love them. Yes, you, mothers, daughters, grand and great-grandmothers, fearsome and generous, humble and honest, in pursuit of new possibilities and purpose. You know, here we dig deep and we come up strong. For those of you joining us for the first time, each month we explore a new theme inspired by you. Yes, I said you. We bravely walk into places where tradition has taught us there's some things we just don't talk about. But not at this table. And no matter how hard judgment knocks, it can't come in. Here, beloved, we live beyond the wreckage. Every week we experience, educate, encourage, and empower each other. We share some aha moments and stories that have been left in our pockets for too long. Every week we start right where we are. I am just so excited about how the show is progressing. We are celebrating our 9th month of proof that dreams can come true. I thank God for every remembrance of you and your gifts of ideas, your presence, your encouragement. You do know I can't do this show without you, right? Thank you so very much. You are listening to Radio Fairfax on your TV, computer, or mobile device, and we are podcasts worldwide on the internet at www.radiofairfax.org every Saturday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Should you miss us, no worries. You can catch our podcasts on YouTube. Just key in Frankly Speaking with Tyra G. And if you feel like connecting with me offline, you know how much I love that, right? My email, tyra@tyragarlington.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, Courtney Nero, for composing and performing our Frankly Speaking theme song and for naming it I'm Listening. So this month's question, what do you want to be when you grow up? This is a question we ask children and adults. We grow up getting clues as to who we should be from significant others and multimedia images and stories. We begin in a once upon a time, and we have a goal of living happily ever after. Somewhere between the ages of 3 and 10, we seem to be drawn to the land of superheroes. Did you know that 37% of children ages 3 to 10, when they ask what they want to be, they want to grow up to be a superhero? However, some children have their dreams interrupted. In keeping with our theme, what we think we know, today we're going to park in a space that is terribly uncomfortable. It is not happy talk. It's educational. We're going to look into and beyond the theme and the phrase human trafficking. We owe ourselves this experience. And so I begin with a quote. Picture this. It's hard to describe the exploitation. It was just everywhere. It was just a part of life. Girls would come to the corner I was working, beat up or looking downcast because they had been emotionally abused by their pimps. There was this girl who tried to work my corner. We got into a huge fight. And then I realized how young she was. I tried to protect her. She was supposed to be in a foster home, but she was being pimped out. Then one day she just disappeared. I saw her pimp a few weeks later, and I asked him where she was. He just laughed and said, she's gone. I sold her at a truck stop. At the time, we didn't have the language of trafficking or understanding of exploitation. They weren't brothel owners. They were men and women who ran hotels and apartments. They weren't pimps. They were boyfriends or brothers, seemingly somehow who cared about us. Later on, I realized that in the industry, unless you're currently being prostituted, you were an exploiter. That's just how it was. If you were making money off of someone else's exploitation, you were an exploiter. So many people today have this image of trafficking victims all tied up in black and blue with bruises. They don't understand that many of the girls and women who are being trafficked are in love with their traffickers or pimps. And these exploiters are subtle coercion experts. They don't do outright violence. The relationships are multi-layered and they're complex. Remember, most exploiters have been doing this for years. And they know the best way to control a prostituted woman is through mental and emotional manipulation. The upside for them is there's no bruises. I knew a pimp who went to community college to take psychology to control his girls. He just saw it as an investment of his time. I was involved in the sex trade for 15 years, from age 13 to 28. I'm now out and have been for about 13 years. I was able to leave because of a relationship I formed with an outreach worker. She broke all the rules and we actually became friends. And through that friendship, which continues to this day, she showed me a lifestyle that was completely different than mine. Something that in time I decided I wanted for my kids and for myself. I think I would have been able to exit earlier if there'd been agencies that could be accessed more anonymously. I was extremely private, and I was embarrassed to walk into agencies where everyone knew what they did. Since I thought I was keeping my working a secret from my friends and loved ones, I didn't want to do groups. But boy, did I want help. It is my understanding that now there are agencies that operate like this. We should be replacing this and offering women a viable way out to a healthier life. It would have also been highly useful to have a livable welfare rate so that I and many, many others like me wouldn't have to work in prostitution in the first place. As of right now, I have a GED, and I'm working on getting a job. I would like to go back to school, maybe get a communications degree. I would continue to work toward the abolition of prostitution. To stop sex trafficking and prostitution, I think we have to go to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the male demand for paid sexual access to women and children's bodies. We need to stop viewing prostituted persons as a part of the problem. They are out there for a myriad of reasons, and they need help and support, which is why we should be working to decriminalize the soul and criminalize the demand. Let me say that again. We should we should be working to decriminalize the sold and criminalize the demand. Let that soak in for a minute, because after our break, I have got a man who believes that every one of us can do better than give up. He is an expert in global trafficking. The thing that hit me as I began to think about what Detective Bill Wolfe and I would talk about is we're local here in Fairfax County, but the problem is global. It intersects. And he has got a wealth of experience, which I'm going to ask him to tell you in his own words after a break. Stay close now. And we are back. I want to keep a promise. I am actually thrilled I was able to get into the busy schedule of my guest today. He is former Detective Bill Wolfe with the Fairfax County Police Department. And I wanted to tell it, but I want him to tell it in his own words. Why don't we do it this way? Bill, you have just authored a book. We opened this book, and the prologue tells the story of how you got to where you are. Will you share that with us now?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Tyra. I really appreciate and the ability to kind of share our message. So, I guess it started quite a long time ago. So I'm legacy law enforcement. Both my grandfather and my father were Fairfax County police officers. Okay. And so you could say that I was predestined to some regards. So after high school, I went on to the University of Virginia and was doing my studies there. Actually entered in the pre-med program. Mm-hmm. And just for whatever crazy reason felt called to not follow that path, and I knew that I either wanted to do military service or law enforcement. Mm-hmm. It was a hard decision. I know my dad had high expectations of me, So I called him one day and I said, Dad, I said, this is the route I want to take, either law enforcement or military. What's your preference? And he said, well, I'd prefer you choose law enforcement. I said, fair enough. He said, on one condition, you have to finish college. And I said, that's fine with me. So shifted my focus to foreign affairs and government. Finished out my career there, met my wife when I was down in college, and we actually got married. So I was married my last year of college, so married very early on. We came back up here as soon as I graduated college, came back up here and started my career in law enforcement. My initial plan was I was going to do 3 years in Fairfax, and then I was going to go the federal route, something more high class, FBI, DEA, something like that. But after about 3 years, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I was just having a blast. I enjoyed serving the community here. I enjoyed what I was doing. Law enforcement, they say it's a front row seat to the greatest show on earth because, you get to see it all. You get to see the good and the bad in the world.
Yes. And
so really just enjoyed doing what I was doing and being out there and working with the people in the community. And about 5 to 6 years in, I decided I wanted a little bit of a change. And so I applied for the gang unit in Fairfax and got that position and went over there. And it was in working gangs that I first kind of got introduced to this issue of sex trafficking that you brought up earlier. I had no training on it. It wasn't an issue that we had been taught to really look out for. And I was working a case involving some MS-13 individuals, and we were collecting evidence. We had an informant that was working within the gang at the time, and he came back and started providing us some information about what I deemed to be prostitution, and that's how I looked at it. And and he said, "Look, this is what they're doing." We had tasked him with. We had said, "Look, we need to understand the illegal activity the gang's involved in, how they're making their money, and what they're doing with that money." And he came back and he said, "Hey, look, they're prostituting these girls." And I said, "Thanks, but we want to know the bad stuff that they're doing," right? It was the mindset. And I think that's, indicative of just kind of how we are as a culture right now. And I think you highlighted that in the beginning of the show. So it wasn't until we kind of took all this information to a prosecutor and said, "This is what we've gathered. We don't think we have a case." The prosecutor looked at us and said, "Well, you have a great human trafficking case." And we said, "What is that? What are you talking about?" Human trafficking doesn't happen here in the United States, certainly not in Northern Virginia. This is a third world problem. And to my surprise and amazement, it was very prevalent here in our own backyard. And that's how I first kind of got involved, and my eyes were opened to the realities.
What did that feel like? Because what you just said to me was culture clash.
Sure.
And so often, now that we are a global entity, we don't have cultural competence in a lot of areas, but it's always looking at the global.
Sure.
To look at something, and what do you mean? When you say, what do you mean? What happened to you inside? I mean, it has blown me away.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I don't want to say it's easy, but it's digestible for us as a community to say, wow, that's really terrible, and it's happening somewhere else in the world. And I hope somebody's doing something about it, or maybe I'll give $50 to an organization. But to come to the realization that it's going on in your backyard, to come to the realization that they are targeting young people, and then being a father at the same time. I mean, your personal world collides with your professional world. I can say that honestly, when I was first introduced to the issue, there was disbelief.
Okay.
Prosecuted the case, sure, and to me it was an efficient use of resources because we were getting bad guys off the street for long periods of time. But I'd say that I really didn't understand it at that point until really dove into the cases, started working multiple cases, started working with the victims on a long-term basis, and realized that this image or this concept that I had of a, quote, prostitute was so different. because once you work with them, once you start to get them help and rehabilitation, and you see that quote street prostitute turn back into a 16-year-old little girl.
Yes, trying to survive.
And that's all that it is, you
Yes.
know, and you hear the struggles that they went through, and you hear you break down through that kind of rough exterior that they've had to develop, you know,
Yes.
to survive. It's survival for them. They have to be hard. And once you get back to that innocence, it's just
Your heart breaks, I'm sure.
It does.
And what I have worked with juveniles, and I have worked with women who are incarcerated. And what always gets to my heart is they didn't have alternatives.
Right.
And I always said to my sons, make sure you have alternatives, you have choices, because otherwise you'll make bad decisions. And with the women, you know, and I had to be very careful because I didn't want to impose.
Right.
I wanted to expose. Yeah.
And, you know, if I can be completely open about it, you know, I mean, we live in an age where we say we support women empowerment, but there are still many sectors of society within our culture and in our community that do not support women the way that they should. They don't see them as equals. And I think part of that and some of the objectification of women that goes on in our culture today creates this environment where trafficking and other forms of exploitation can thrive.
I know.
You know, these young people, they think, well, I made a bad decision, or this is all I'm good for. You know, the self-esteem.
The devaluing,
Absolutely.
yes. I applaud the fact that you stuck to it, and more importantly, that you're being authentic with the fact that understanding and stepping into this space and living there is a process. It is not an event. You can't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to be a hero over here.
Right.
You have to let go of some stuff you came into this world with in terms of expectations.
You're right. And, you know, I have to give a lot of credit to my children for that. I remember
Really?
my daughter, Emma, came to me, and I'm in my hobby, I fly airplanes. And so she came to me one day, and she was talking to me, and she knows how passionate I am. And she said, Dad, can I be a pilot when I grow up?
Aww.
And I said, well, absolutely. Why not? She says, well, I'm a girl.
Oh.
And I said, Emma, you can be anything you want to be.
Yes.
And I think that the innocence of a child sometimes can really open your eyes to what's going on around you and kind of the culture that we live in at times.
Absolutely. So, all right, now you're in Fairfax County. You're in this unit. What does the unit look like? Are there lots of you? Does everyone understand? What kind of training do you get? You know, like we can't cookie cutter good people like you.
So it's interesting, you know, about the same time that I was getting involved with this, it was really when it started to take hold on a national level. And so a lot of my colleagues in other departments and other law enforcement agencies across the country, you know, we look at each other and say, when we were getting involved, we didn't know what we were doing. There was no training at that time. I mean, we created the training. We created the investigative approaches, you know, so at that time there was no specific unit to really handle this issue, you know, because you have your vice units, they handle prostitution, but it's not, you know, it's not prostitution, and that's a mindset, you know, that's
exactly,
a mindset.
Exactly. Yes.
So, you know, certainly there has been challenges along the way. There's been some very serious challenges to you know, the garnering the support and, you know, behind doing what you want to do and what you know to exist. Today, I, you know, can say that the Fairfax County Police Department is moving forward. They have a human trafficking unit. They have a detective that's dedicated full time to this, and actively aggressively pursuing, you know, leads for trafficking and looking for innovative ways to combat the issue. But this is, you know, something new, and it certainly is not across the board with all law enforcement agencies.
Right. Yes, I wanted to get to that. And the other thing, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at you. Okay. the unit or the people addressing the issues now, are they mainly male?
I think you have a mix. I mean, law enforcement is still predominantly a male profession. I will say that locally here in Fairfax, in the Northern Virginia area, it's a little more progressive, and you do have some more equality in that. I will say that leadership is very keen on trying to create equality with that. But, across the country, that's not always the case.
I know. I know. And the other thing that comes across, since we are able to be transparent and authentic, is class, race, all has to play into that.
Sure.
And the units that are trying to serve the underserved without choices, what's that like to build a relationship? How do you break into it? Can you give me some examples? You discover, or let's say a gang is being prosecuted for this. How do you interface with the young women who may be collateral damage? What do you do?
Tyra, I think one of the most important things to remember is we're all equal, regardless of race or class or academic achievement levels, how successful we are. It doesn't matter. And I think that was one of the things that I really focused on. You meet with a young woman or a young man that was involved in these types of situations.
Okay.
And there's a lot of shame and embarrassment and other sort of negative feelings. And, one of the approaches that I had is I never just jumped in and said, well, tell me your story. Tell me what happened to you. Tell me all the bad things. You approach that interaction, not an interview, not an interrogation. You approach
relationship building.
You do. You build that rapport with them, and you let them know from the onset. You said, listen, I'm not here to judge you. I don't want you to trust me just because of a badge that I wear or a uniform or anything like that. So what do I need to do to earn your trust?
Now, that's a question. That question right there is you've engaged them as a part of the solution.
Right.
And you've shown that you value them. So I think that, but did you have psychology and sociology input in getting you to that place, or did you just come into the world like that?
Let's say good parents. We'll give them credit for that.
All right, do you hear that, Mom and Dad?
That's right. So no, and my faith plays a big role in what I do and how I respond to individuals as well.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful to hear. I was actually principal of a school. 800 adjudicated kids, ages 10 to 18. And I remember there were 14 women out of the 800, and you know what the attendance was like. But the one thing that I learned was silence. Be the last one to speak sometimes. Listen to them. Understand what that walk means, what that look means, because what we've just said is they're trying to survive. And most of them don't have options. And
and they're trying to survive in a world that a lot of us don't understand.
Yes.
I think we forget about that. We get so wrapped up in our routines and what we know to be normal behavior, and it's hard for us sometimes to imagine the world that they live in. And I think you're absolutely right. Silence, listening, letting them educate you.
Yes.
So you know where they're coming from.
Right.
Because then you, regardless of your role as a principal, as a law enforcement officer, as a social worker, you are better equipped to provide for the needs of that individual.
Right. Absolutely. And for me, it was walking the talk and never raising my voice. And I actually had to coordinate with the police, the community police. Don't come unless I call you, because they had a habit of coming. And I noticed the students sized me up over a period of time.
Sure.
And when they saw my behavior aligned with the conversations we had, it was like opening a whole new door. My heart bled. And I will say this, of all the experiences I've had, and there have been many, that school that year did more to affirm who I am than any other time because I was tested the whole time.
Yeah, I think those are moments in our life that, at the time we don't realize how powerful they really are in forming who we are.
Yes.
And, we can look back on those moments and, if we went back to the moment, those months, those years that I was in it and working those cases, to me it was, at first, it was a job. And, now I look back and to who it's formed me to be and my perspective and what I feel my mission now is in life has completely changed.
Isn't that interesting? And I like to do, I do some inspirational speaking, and I like to say to people, you have everything inside of you to be who you were created to be. I'm just here to help you open the doors. That's all. We all have a destiny. Let me ask you this. I was reading about you, and I saw 3 letters come up like FBI. Then I saw Homeland Security and some awards and things like that you did. Do you want to share?
Sure. So at the time, because it was a new area that we were really exploring, when I first started working trafficking in Virginia, we didn't have any anti-trafficking laws. There was no
oh my goodness
criminal laws that we could kind of mold and deal, but there was no specific legislation outlawing trafficking. And so a lot of the work that we did was on the federal level. And so I worked as a task force officer with federal agencies to be able to investigate them and prosecute them on the federal level.
So let me make sure I understand and the audience understands. What you're saying is without having local ability to prosecute, how did you then take the case? How did you do that? Was it just a collaboration between local and federal, or?
So we do federal agencies create task forces, and what they can essentially deputize local and state officers to have the same authority that a federal agent has on a very specific scale. So to work these investigations, and so that was how we dealt with them for the longest time, and they're still being dealt with in some regards on the federal.
Do we
level.
have laws now?
In 2015, Tyra, we enacted our first law.
Wow.
Yep.
So, all right, what does that allow our local law enforcement to do, that law?
I think the most important thing the law does is it defines the problem. You can't ask law enforcement to investigate something that they can't define.
That's true.
And police define things based on what's legal and what's illegal. So I think that was the biggest benefit to having that law in place is Virginia formally defined what human trafficking is, and that allotted the resources or the response mechanism for police to respond.
So what would be the cues that you would look for if you're on the street, policeman? I know what visually I see as a street prostitute, but that's not necessarily where human trafficking is starting.
Right. Unfortunately, we see the age of trafficked persons going down. And so we see 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds being drawn into it. And unfortunately, these are individuals that could even be living in their own homes, Tyra. They could be sleeping in their own beds, going to school, and these traffickers take advantage of them in the afternoon hours.
Oh, no.
And exploit them or over the weekend. And they're not, that kind of pretty woman image, the mini skirt and the high heels. That's not what you see.
I was thinking it might be like runaways or I'm sure that happens like in the bus stations and all that, and homelessness.
Sure.
I want to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
But what you're telling me is my daughter, I could be at work, and for whatever reason she's been seduced, whether it's money, drugs, or whatever, to spend this amount of time
right
in the afternoon
right
performing certain things. Oh my gosh,
it's terrible. And I mean, it's truly life altering, the effects of the crime itself. And sometimes we talked earlier about the fact that the community doesn't necessarily see the problem, or they don't understand the problem.
Right.
And so
right.
a parent may think that the child's having behavioral issues or rebelling.
Just acting out.
Right.
Okay.
And never be able to identify. And that child, most children are not going to be comfortable enough to come forward and say, hey, mom or dad, I'm a prostitute.
No, I don't think so.
No, how are we
No.
going to react to that?
Yeah.
So it's so important that we're having this conversation, and I'm thankful that you're spreading the message.
Well, and I want to actually do kind of a plug here. This is one of probably several conversations. We're talking about it today with Bill from the lens of law enforcement, but we're going to be blessed soon to speak to a mother of a daughter who's had this experience, and that will be in our next month. And who knows where we'll go from them, because as I said, we got stuff to talk about here.
Yes,
you know, people are sitting around a table, and I want them to feel comfortable enough to say, hey, let me ask my daughter this. Let me ask my son this. And there's a fine line between what's happening with young people and sex and dating and all, and crossing over.
Right.
And we should be alarmed.
It's a blurry line.
Yes.
That's the problem, is it's a blurry line. You know, a lot of times these traffickers, that's how they operate. You know, they make these young people fall in love with them, and then it's through some, made up emergency or even a guilt trip. If you loved me, you would do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And, and these young people, without having a good grasp or concept of what real love is, because there's so much learning that goes on through the internet. And
yes,
it's problematic. We live somewhat in a fantasy world right now, because these young people, they're learning about healthy relationships. Well, they're not healthy, but they're learning about relationships through, TV and YouTube and some of these other locations. And I think it's really important, especially right now, because there's so many mixed messages.
I agree.
And more than ever before, do we need to be having these conversations now?
And I keep thinking of several things, actually, when I think of young people, preteen up, is their need to belong, their need to be affirmed, and their inability to see that most of what they're seeing in terms of beauty has been airbrushed.
Yes.
Most of what they're seeing in terms of movies has been rehearsed and scripted.
Yes.
And it's not a commercial, it's a life. And how do we help them understand? Because when I look at them on a date, looking down in their laps at their devices, and what are they missing in creating real intimacy?
Well, I can't tell you how frustrating it is to go out to dinner and to look at the family across the way, and everybody's buried in their device.
Yes.
Nobody's having a conversation.
Right.
They're all on social media or, playing games.
Or playing games.
And now you go to some restaurants and they provide the games for you on those devices.
I know.
And it's, I think there's just a real breakdown in intimacy, in that connection. And we are still human. We need that.
And are hungry for it.
Yes.
And I always talk about hallelujah hugs, and I will ask young people, may I give you a hug? Because I don't want it to be misinterpreted, but they are so hungry.
Yes.
Hungry for that. And I'm talking healthy hugs. I'm not talking,
right.
And they don't necessarily discern. They're so hungry.
Mm-hmm.
They can't discern. Is this a good hug or a bad hug, a good touch or a bad touch? What I need to do is, I do this all the time. I get so involved. We need to take a commercial break.
Sure.
We will be right back. Don't you go far now. And we are back. If you are just joining us, we are having a wonderful conversation with former Detective Bill Wolfe. And our topic is uncomfortable and yet extremely necessary. All of us as adults and all of us as young people who have peers that may need to have a conversation. That's another thing I want us to harp on. This is an intergenerational show as well as international. We need to encourage our young people to be honest with one another. Sometimes it's so important for them to fit in they keep secrets, terrible secrets that are tearing them apart. And not forcibly, not bullying, but just be sensitive to that person you're calling friend.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So in some of the work that I do now, we encourage two specific things. One is peer-to-peer education. You know, we want young people talking to young people about these issues. The other thing is we employ what we call is 3 to Succeed. We want that young person to have 3 trusted adults in their life. It doesn't always have to be a parent, and I bring that up specifically with this trafficking issue because I met a woman today actually who was trafficked. She's a professional now, an adult, very successful. But she was actually trafficked by her own mother starting at the age of 8.
Now, see, this is something we don't talk about.
It is.
And I know that's happening.
Absolutely. I mean, you link it directly to what's going on with the opioid epidemic.
Yes, absolutely.
And other things. These adults with children are getting addicted to drugs, and when they need money,
yes, I know.
There's that child.
Yeah.
And they can make, unfortunately, they can make good money off
especially
of that
the
child.
young ones.
Absolutely.
Yes. And what bothers me so is this is so uncomfortable to talk about. It's easier to look away.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about sustainability of not just our children, but of our future. You know, we're losing these children. We need them to be functional. We need them to be alert and competent when they're adjusting our tubes while we're in the nursing home. Okay? So what message would you give to a young person how they might approach a friend? And then I want to segue into what you're committed to and doing now, which I think is totally wonderful.
Yes. So, you know, the big thing is to be there for your friend. You know, we need to be aware of what's going on in each other's lives. And so if I noticed that all of a sudden you were starting to isolate yourself from our peer group and you started acting secretive and depressed and you started physically looking worn down, like you just weren't sleeping well, possibly that you had an older boyfriend or girlfriend, these would all be indicators to me that something's wrong. And I think, unfortunately, our younger population and our adult population, you know, would look at that situation and say, you know what, if they don't want to be part of our group anymore, we'll move on. We don't have time for that.
Yes.
But those are huge warning signs. Those are signs that something's wrong. And so we have to empower the community to look out for each other, to be a community.
And I'm looking at a brochure that says, just ask to end human trafficking. And I know this is a spirit-to-spirit, heart-to-heart initiative. Can you take just a few minutes and share with us what this is?
Sure. So back when we were first getting started, we had a mandate to do some community outreach and awareness. And so we started thinking about, you know, how is it that we're going to do it and what's kind of a campaign. And there was a young woman that we had recovered out of a hotel. She was 17 years old. I was interviewing Emily, and she said she had been trafficked since the age of 13.
Oh, my.
And for 4 years, she had been being exploited by these traffickers. During that time, she had both parents involved in her life. She got involved in the juvenile justice system because she started acting out, and they thought it was behavioral issues. There were truancy issues with school. So she had counselors, probation officers, all these people,
all support
professionals
system.
involved in her life, and yet she was continuing to be trafficked. I said, Emily, how is it possible that this happened for 4 years and nobody ever knew? She said, nobody ever asked me.
Oh, my gosh.
If somebody would have just asked. I wanted to tell somebody. I wanted out. I did not want to be doing this. But everybody kept blaming me. Everybody kept saying I had behavioral issues. I needed to get better grades. I needed to have a better attitude. And nobody ever asked me. And that broke my heart, Tyra.
But you see, that's the key.
It is.
That's the key that opens the door. And when I was saying before, be the last one to speak, a lot of times, even when I'm talking with women that I am coaching, is to listen intentionally and then ask the question, where does it hurt? And if I think it's one thing, is it possible that? But to give that person permission to go there.
Yes.
And sometimes their shame this is what people, I think, don't understand, that the difference between guilt and shame, when you are ashamed of something that you do, you become that thing.
Yes.
So if you do something bad, you think you're bad. No, you have to learn to separate what you do from who you are. And that's, your example was wonderful. So did that contribute to the birth
So that
of?
was the name. We sat around. I remember sitting around someone's dining room table, brainstorming. What are we going to call this campaign?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that story, and I said, you know what? In memory of Emily, let's just ask.
Let's just
ask. And so the concept is we've developed programs around the idea of educating with the message of ask your neighbor what's going on. Not necessarily ask for help, right? Because now we're putting the burden back on the victim, right? And we've got to stop doing that.
Right.
They're burdened with surviving at that point.
Yes.
Let's put the burden back on the community and say we need to be the ones looking out. We need to be the ones that are asking and providing the opportunities and the help and the safe environment to have that conversation.
I think you said a key word, the safe environment. The one thing that I understand about victims, they can discern when they're in a safe environment. They can discern when they're in a place where they can take a step toward survival. And the rest of the time, they're just like, let me make it through right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what's been the success? I know people are probably saying, come, talk to us.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Again, turning back the clock, if I ever thought that this is where I would be at this point in my life. But, I believe so passionately in the mission that we have. And we've had huge successes, both in preventing young people from getting involved because they were able to identify the grooming process, and also empowering young people that were being exploited to get out of the situation, saving those young lives from being involved in this. So we've developed basically 5 program areas that we work in. And through those areas, we are building safety nets in communities.
Okay.
You're going to walk a high wire, you're going to have a safety net underneath of it, right? And these young people are walking high wires in today's society, and we need to build that safety net. I find it interesting that we talk a lot about drugs. We warn our young people, drugs are bad, drugs are out there, just say no, all of these things that are out there. But how many of us are talking to our kids about trafficking and the threats of traffickers?
But see, that's the whole point. And when I say, there's things we're going to talk about here that people don't.
Right.
And that's another thing. I'm doing the series on courageous conversations. So we're going to be looking at a lot of things people are not comfortable talking about. But if we're going to make it, we have to be. Let me ask you this. If someone wanted to know more about the campaign, or if they wanted you to come speak because you obviously have a message, and I'm very grateful you're sharing it, how do they get in touch with you?
So they can visit our website, which is justaskprevention.org, or they can also email us at info@justaskprevention.org. And I'm glad you bring that up because we would love to partner, and I know that you have a listener base all across the country and even internationally. We would love to be able to bring our campaign and our programs to other communities across the United States.
Okay.
And also internationally, we're actually working in some foreign countries now. And it's a really exciting time for us.
It's an exciting time for me because my heart is with the future. Looking in young people's eyes, there are all kinds of stories, and I'm looking for joy. But when I see pain, I have to step in there and say, "Okay, I'm here."
And it's interesting. We want to protect the young people, but I in my spare time, I'm an adjunct professor at George Mason. I tell the students there, and I say, listen, I said, we're just finding our way right now. You all are the change makers.
Absolutely.
You all are going to set the policies and put the programs in place that are going to affect real change.
Absolutely. I asked you to do homework for me, and you said, "Oh, Tyra, I didn't." So we're going to do impromptu. I asked Bill if he'd write a letter to his younger self. Maybe it'd be easier. Pretend like you're talking to your daughter.
Sure.
Okay, you want to do that for me?
Sure.
All right, let's go with that.
You know, when I was growing up, I wanted to be wealthy. I wanted to be able to support my family and do good things. I thought that I would have 2 children, be married, live in the nice house, hopefully be a doctor or some successful government worker. But as I started to grow and start to interact with more and more people, I felt a calling, a great respect for the work that my dad had done, and felt that law enforcement was really the path for me. So I started my career, had a great time, had fun, driving fast, running after bad guys. Really enjoyed that in my younger days, and got to work with gang members, and that really started to open my eyes to the reality of things. And I think for so long I'd been selfish. I'd been selfish in my approach to life, and I had ignored other people around me. And what I want you to know is that sometimes those messages come from people you don't expect them to come from gang members, from people that might be looked down upon in society as simply prostitutes. But they can really change your life. And I want you to be open to all possibilities. And I want you to succeed, and I want you to be successful. But I also want you to be able to take risks, to stand up for others, to protect those that may not be in a position where they can protect themselves.
Yes. And she'll always be Daddy's little girl. You know that.
She's a beautiful little girl.
I'll send her some love.
Thank you.
Wow. I want to remind people, when your day happens and you're going, oh, I am sick of being tired. I'm tired of being tired. I don't like this. I don't want to hear that. I got to remind you that you're worthy and you're not alone. You are not your circumstance. There's something that you've been created to do that only you can do. Get in touch with who you are. You are a designer's original. Your label was created by God. Please understand this. You've been listening to Frankly Speaking with Tyra G. My guest has been Bill Wolfe. A heart of gold and a spirit to give in that space, that uncomfortable space called human trafficking. If there's just one of you out there that heard a message that struck home, then this show has done what it was supposed to do. And if there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you who can think of someone that maybe you want to spend a little more time with, please do. Remember, you're not alone. Your seat is guaranteed. I look forward to visiting with you again next week, same time. I think we'll let Beethoven take us out. Bye now.